Welcome to today's explainer. We usually operate under this massive assumption that immense power and massive wealth automatically grant you absolute freedom. We look at celebrities, politicians, billionaires, and we just assume, right? We assume they can say absolutely whatever they want, whenever they want, with zero consequences. But as we're going to see in today's source material, the reality of how influence actually works, it's kind of the exact opposite.
So I want you to keep this specific question in mind as we unpack this today. Does more power truly equal more freedom? It feels like a total no-brainer. Yes, doesn't it? Like if you have millions of followers or, billions of dollars, your voice is amplified to the literal ends of the earth. But the text we're diving into today challenges that at its very core. It plants the seed of this huge paradox that governs our media, our politics, and honestly, our everyday conversations. What if climbing to the absolute top of the societal ladder actually strips away the one right we always assume it guarantees? And this brilliantly illustrates the point. Just let this quote from our source sink in for a second. Your freedom of speech is directly proportional to how insignificant and unknown you are. Wow. It's a pretty shocking statement at first glance, right? The text is basically arguing that you actually have a massive amount of freedom to speak your mind when you are, well, in the grand scheme of things, a nobody. But the exact second you become famous, your freedom of speech is actively curtailed. It's the ultimate irony. Climbing to the top essentially just buys you a gag order. Your platform gets way bigger for sure, but the actual parameters of what you're allowed to say, they shrink dramatically. Think of influence like this giant societal seesaw. On one side, you have the nobody, someone with, say, 20 social media followers. They possess this bizarre hidden superpower. They can express highly unpopular, totally unfiltered, or even controversial thoughts. And, well, their life will largely just continue uninterrupted. High freedom of speech, but incredibly low impact. But then, look at the other side, the famous person, the one with millions of people hanging on their every single word. That immense weight, that impact, it sends their freedom crashing straight to the ground. Their speech is strictly curtailed by their own status.
Okay, let's dive into this. What are the actual mechanics behind this gag order? Why does fame literally silence people? Well, our source points to this sort of suffocating microscope. Famous and powerful individuals are operating under constant surveillance. The media, the public, we're continuously watching, dissecting every single syllable for a potential misstep. And this constant, heavy scrutiny generates an unbelievable amount of pressure to just conform to whatever the current societal expectations happen to be, simply to avoid controversy. And building directly on that intense scrutiny is reputation management. Look, for a public figure, reputation isn't just some vague, abstract concept, right? It's their livelihood. It's their brand. It is the absolute source of their power. The source material makes it super clear that public figures are profoundly concerned about protecting this. This intense fear of a massive backlash acts as their primary psychological filter. It severely, and I mean severely, limits their willingness to express any opinion that might be deemed unpopular. So they aren't really speaking their true thoughts anymore. They're speaking these meticulously calculated thoughts designed purely to keep their reputation safe.
But on a macro level, this dynamic flips in a really fascinating way. While a powerful leader might be totally terrified of personal backlash and, silence their own controversial thoughts, they still absolutely hold the keys to the kingdom. They possess vast resources and structural influence, and they use these tools to actively shape the broader public discourse from right behind the scenes. Furthermore, as the source notes, they sometimes use this systemic power to actually suppress dissenting voices that might challenge their very carefully curated narratives. Which brings us to the exact opposite end of the spectrum here, marginalized voices. We're talking about groups of people who operate entirely outside those structures of elite reputation management. They aren't managing multi-million-dollar brands, right? They aren't waking up worried about mainstream media dissecting their morning tweets. By definition, they lack fame, power, and significant structural influence.
And this creates a deeply, deeply frustrating dilemma. Because marginalized groups lack fame, they theoretically possess the ultimate freedom to speak their minds. They can voice the raw, unvarnished truth without that paralyzing fear of destroying some high-profile reputation. But, and here's the catch, that theoretical freedom comes at a really steep structural cost. Their complete freedom to speak is met with a severe lack of representation and influence. They can say absolutely whatever they want, but society often just isn't listening because they lack the giant microphone needed to actually penetrate the mainstream. So the crucial point is, why does this actually matter to you and me?
Well, because our source explicitly outlines that a healthy democracy simply cannot function on an echo chamber of carefully curated, reputation-safe talking points. No way. It absolutely requires the raw, unfiltered input of the marginalized, just as much as it needs the structural reach of the powerful. It literally relies on a true diversity of voices, robust open debate, and sharp critical thinking just to survive, let alone thrive.
Which actually brings us to a secondary, incredibly dangerous paradox highlighted in the text. We already know fame silences people. But think about it. If the powerful are too terrified of societal backlash to ever voice a truly divergent thought, open debate dies. If our leaders and our most visible public figures are entirely stripped of their ability to speak freely, the overall intellectual health of our democracy degrades. Critical thinking basically gets replaced by this sterile, super safe conformity. So this leaves us with a massive, critical challenge. How do democratic nations actually strike a balance here? It is incredibly complex. On one hand, you have individual rights, right? The fundamental right for anyone, famous or not, to just speak their mind. But on the other hand, you have massive societal interests, the absolute need to hold the powerful accountable and to ensure marginalized voices aren't just entirely drowned out. Finding that equilibrium between giving individuals freedom and holding them to public responsibility is a tightrope walk that pretty much every democratic nation is struggling with today.
As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a final thought. The relationship between influence and free speech, it's not a straight line. It is this intricate, ultimate societal ecosystem. It's a constant, daily weighing of the liberating power of freedom of speech against the incredibly heavy burden of public responsibility. So the next time you see a public figure speak, or, remain notably silent, or even the next time you post your own thoughts online, ask yourself, what is the true cost of my influence? Keep thinking critically, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.